My intentions were to release a video like this a couple days before their banner got here, but I had to take care of the Locha god, and you know how that goes. You guys know how that goes. There we go. That said, my opinions about Yukong have changed. My thoughts on her in the meta presence, those haven't changed, and I'll explain that in a bit. Originally, I believed her to be a harder Bronya / Ting Yun to play or to fit on teams because of the amount of fine tuning she's gonna need to work, and that's let's just say that was quickly proven true while I was doing all my testing, at least for me. This mostly follows my own desires to fit her into this incredibly niche, constantly buffing position where the cycle order goes something like Yukong DPS, Yukong DPS, Yukong sustain, Yukong, and so on and so forth. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, that's hard as fuck. There is something particular about Yukong that is unique to her though, which I believe is the key to unlocking the strength of destruction characters now and in the future. However, I'm definitely gonna talk about that in a whole different video, but I'll touch on it here. In this video, consider it my final impressions, my thoughts and opinions on the character, taking what I've learned, what I've been taught from some fellow peers in the content creation realm, theory crafters, and even the CN bros. Before we get into today's video, I wanted to mention our sponsor of today's video, which I'm sure many of you have heard of them. I can't go a day without seeing it. Raid Shadow Legends, a free-to-play online RPG that has both PvE and PvP content. It's filled with over 700 playable champions, each having their own unique abilities and skills. And on top of that, has constant updates for new content to explore, raid, and build. You can play Raid Shadow Legends on your PC or mobile device, which is going to allow you to play on the go and at your convenience. Now, I recently started playing Raid Shadow Legends a while ago in order to explore what other RPGs have to offer, and come to find out, this game has PvP. I already love creating different builds for characters, so being able to test out new strategies and do it how I want to in PvP was perfect. My personal favorite is Zargala. She's S tier in my opinion for 3 reasons. 1, she's hot. 2, she's an orc, and I love orcs, they're my favorite race. 3, she's got a giant axe. How can you not love her? Did I mention she gets her own commercials? They've also recently released a limited animated series called Call of the Arbiter, as well as this new boss, Akumori, the Phantom Shogun. This undead general is the key to unlocking the new accessory ascension feature needed to upgrade your gear even further. And I'm telling you that you get all of that for free? Yes, sir. I know a lot of you will be new players, so make sure to use my link in the description or scan the QR code right here on screen to get yourself a free starter pack with a bunch of in-game loot. Now let's all thank Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring today's video. I appreciate that. So as I mentioned previously, there was this particular playstyle that I've been trying to achieve with Yukong since pre-release, both in theory and in application. After a week of purely tinkering with her sets to see if I could even do this in the first place, I finally did it. Unfortunately, it requires way too many resources, and it felt more like a one-time conditional than it did a consistency I could depend on every time. Yukong needed more than 150 speed as a baseline as it is, and then that number was way closer to 171 than it was 150 in order for me to do what I'm trying to do. Then I needed both my DPS units to be somewhere in the middle of that, but not so fast that Zila's E2 passive would overlap Yukong. And those of us that know about Zila, we know how that goes. You don't really control when she does what she wants. So unfortunately, this happened all the time, at least almost all the time, because she naturally is going to hit the 160 or something like that on her own. The sub DPS needed to be slower than the even faster Yukong so she could weave in between the both of them, but only on specific turns in order to take full advantage of the huge crit boost from her ult while Bowstrings is active. And I don't have E6 Yukong, so I can't get the passive bowstring to activate whenever I do my ult. Then E1 Yukong with the 10% speed boost to the entire party completely messes up my initial speed tuning, and then it forced me to do even different tests that included outside sources like the enemies or single buffs or whatever. Needless to say, Yukong was the most high maintenance character I've ever worked with, and the worst part about it was I just don't think I need her to do that particular thing. She doesn't need to weave in between the DPS units at all times because that buff doesn't need to be up at all times. I only honestly need it when it matters, and then realizing that through my own testing of the character as well as discussing some stuff with the CN bros taught me a brand new way to play the character. Now it might not be brand new to you. I'm sure you might have been playing her the way this way that I'm going to talk about in particular the entire time, but for me and me wanting to do a particular thing with the character because that's just what I enjoy doing, I didn't get to do that. So this is new to me. Currently I'm aware of running a slower Yukong, otherwise known as slow Kong. I'm coining that, but I'm aware of running a slow Kong as well as a fast Kong. I don't really like fast Kong. You can't call her fast Yukong, but speed tune to your DPS, or my bad, your healer character, so that your healer is pretty much the fastest character on the game, goes first, Yukong goes right after that, and then both of your sub or DPS units go right after that. In regards to Blade, however, I haven't had the best outcome doing this, only because of the fact that when I want Blade to be healed, I want my healer to go last. So it's this weird conundrum where I'm trying to speed tune Blade to everyone else and then get everyone else to follow Blade plus my Bronya, or in this case, if I'm replacing Bronya with Yukong, then I go from there. This entire time I've been looking at how to keep her buff active for as long as possible since, well, for those of you that don't know, the actual crit buff doesn't have a time limit. It physically stays active for as long as Roaring Bowstrings is in play. But keeping Bowstrings active to be able to do that requires the most insane amount of work right now. Maybe if we get a speed-based relic set in the future, I can revisit this theory, but as of right now, it's safer for me to just build Yukong with the principle in mind that she's gonna buff my DPS when they need it. Let's also just kind of skip over the fact that I wasn't taking advantage of her actual talent, which boosts the break efficiency of her basic attack. Yes, I was being an SP sinkhole, if you will, and I was spamming EEE with my Yukong, but it worked. It worked for me. It worked for me. But maybe not for you guys, but for me it worked because I had I was using Arlen for most of my tests, so I didn't consume the skill point as it was. Now, the break efficiency thing is something that not many characters have without using the simulated universe, and some of you might see like, oh, well, why is that important? I don't care about that, and you should, because it's basically ultimate damage or a little bit under ultimate damage without needing to use your ultimate. So finally, after playing with everyone else's idea of Yukong, I came to the conclusion that none of them really fit with my current roster of teams. Some of the characters I just don't have, like Clara or Yangqing, and a lot of what they're accomplishing was better suited for these characters, while me being stuck with the Jingyuin and Zila, they didn't really make ends meet, at least not the way that I wanted. Now, I don't know if Mr. Poke knew exactly what I was going through, but he dropped this speed tuning analysis video of Yukong, and it's like he answered all of my issues going from step 1, step 2, step 3, okay, back to step 1. Step 1, oh, these are the issues I faced in step 2 and 3. I'm just gonna skip to step 4 now. What I loved about it the most is that his analysis of CN has combined everyone's viewpoint into a single document. Granted, if I had E6 Yukong, none of this would be an issue, and I'd probably get away with what I'm trying to do. However, this document really brought to light what I couldn't explain in words, and I've been trying to do it for a week straight. There are too many outside factors that influence speed and action cycles that it got to a point where trying to achieve what I wanted with Yukong was borderline the definition of insanity. Every Yukong build I've seen has been the right one, quote unquote. I don't know, okay, time out. I don't know why I always say quote unquote. I feel like you guys can tell by the inflection of my voice when I'm saying something that I'm quoting something, but sometimes you can't. And I don't know. I don't want y'all to take something that I say and then put it out of context and then run with it. But the right one, okay? Every Yukong build I've seen has been the right one for whatever team that player was building at that moment in time. Moon's Yukong won't work with my Zila team because my Zila is going to outperform the Yukong and then just move ahead of her, which seems to be the case for most of the Yukongs because my Zila is E2 or higher. However, that Yukong will work with my Himiko. Brims won't work for me because I'm just not pumping my healer with 150 speed. It is what it is. Also, side note, your boy randomly pulled Himiko last night, so big dubs in the chat. I now have all my baby mamas in the game until Kafka releases, and with the announcement, we know she's coming in 1.2. We just don't know if she's first or second. Taking all that into account, I've changed my Yukong at least 4 times now, but high key, it was worth it. I've been learning so much about building characters that it's given me a newfound joy during the dry periods of the game. These final impressions I have pertaining to Yukong could possibly change in the future depending on more discoveries and experience I get with the character, but as of right now, here's how I feel. I still believe she's the currently accessible key to unlocking the destruction path in Starro. Now, in regards to Blade and how I feel about Blade plus Yukong, I don't feel like Yukong actually replaces Bronya. However, I do think that crit bonus is really all it is. Now, if you were to get an E6 Yukong, that dramatically changes things because now every time you use your ultimate, at the very minimum, you're going to be able to keep that buff for at least 1 turn. Then if you get into the concept of the idea of speed tuning Yukong to Blade so that you get it to where your Blade goes right after Yukong, then you're pretty much always going to be guaranteed having that massive crit boost. And so getting this 50% crit rate boost and this 80% or 70% crit damage boost is going to be crazy to add on top top of the fact that Blade already has an insanely high crit ratio built into his kit. I think out of all the options I have in regarding to a Harmony character, as much as I don't like Yukong with some of the other characters, I do kind of like Yukong a little bit more with Blade. And so I'm still leaning towards Yukong being the opener to destruction teams or destruction type teams because of the fact that destruction path characters don't really use or consume a lot of skill points, at least they shouldn't. And if they do, Yukong can make up for that by being able to spam her skill points just like you would with Bronya. That ultimately comes down to speed buffing the crap out of Yukong though, which might be a little easier now that we have the messenger set in the game. With her unique ability to buff 2 DPS units, I want to start seeing more meta-defying team constructions. And what I mean by that is a 3-man squad instead of a 4-man squad. Yukong basically constantly buffs the 2 units on the team, while a destruction unit like Arlen doesn't consume the skill points, and then your third teammate generates them while possibly sustaining. This obviously is just a fun theory that I have in mind, but I'll test it once I actually get a destruction unit on my account that isn't Arlen. Until then, it's whatever. In the game's current state, Yukong feels like a giant waste on plenty of teams that do not consist of double DPS units. And I don't mean fake sub DPS units either, where you make your team unit do 5k damage or whatever. I mean legit putting Zila and Himiko on one team or Jingyuan and Sushang on another team. General concepts that I've spoken about in the past, but a lot of players don't actually get to use them. Yukong's unlocked the ability for those team comps to work way easier without needing to sync a bunch of skill points from 2 different buffers. For obvious reasons, this does not apply to Clara, though it would probably be more beneficial if she did have another DPS to help clear waves faster. If you're running a solo DPS, you get a lot more value out of units like Bronya, Tingyun, so on and so forth. And I'm not the biggest fan of it solely because my Silver Wolf is built around break and not damage. But the double imaginary and quantum team is OD. Silver Wolf nerfs everything to the ground, Yukong buffs the quantum units to hell, and then Locha keeps everybody alive with a combination of his skill and talent. You're basically being rewarded for obliterating the enemy. Finally, Yukong is allowed to take full advantage of both her buff and the enhanced toughness break because of how strong the team is. So she doesn't really need to depend on trying to buff everyone all the time. And in most of my MOC runs between floors 7 through 10, I've been clearing whatever floor it is in about 2 to 3 turns on a damn good run. With Himiko landing in my account last night, I'm way more excited to actually experience a double DPS comp, but that's gonna take a lot more time because your boy ran out of resources. Again, moral of this story, Yukong rhymes with Donkey Kong. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, do feel free to leave a like and comment your own opinions about the character down below. I'm enjoying these videos where I tell a story of my experience to all of you through the game itself, and hopefully you enjoy them as well. Now I got to get out of here because I still haven't started my summer of finishing JRPGs. I can't say my usual outro because it's inappropriate for YouTube. Smell you later.